So I just got back from TCT Asia 2025 in Shanghai here, and wow, it was packed this year with innovation, surprises, and honestly some things I didn't even expect. From aluminum and titanium to soft materials, UV color changing materials, everything from mini printers to gigantic printers the size of entire rooms. Just about anything you could think of 3D printing related, you could find it there. I went there looking for Bambu Labs' rumored H2D printer, but what I found instead was a deep dive into the future of 3D printing, from furniture to footwear and everything in between. So in this video, I'm going to try and share with you as much as I can for my trip and journey in TCT Asia 2025 and bring you all the coolest trends that I saw there. So let's get into it. So I did find the Bambu Labs booth there. It was a really small booth, not what I was expecting. And I was on the lookout for the H2D printer announcement, but unfortunately they didn't have any information on it. It seems like they're not quite ready to launch it at this point yet. There wasn't too much new or to see in the Bambu Labs booth. It was quite small, and they're really showing off more of the unique models from their Bambu Handy, printing community. Less emphasis on the printers and more emphasis on the 3D models from what I could see. Over at Creality, another big name in the industry, I asked about their best-selling 3D printer models, and they pointed me to the High Series and the High Series Combo. They said they're selling them faster than they can make them, and in February alone, they sold more than 40,000 units. Talk about some big volume there. Also at Creality, I saw they had several filament dryers, which I didn't know they made. They had a nice single spool model, which they called the Space Pi, a nice double spool model that they called the Space Pi Plus, and then they just came out with and announced a new 4-spool filament dryer that was called the Space Pi X4. So this larger model could fit up to 4 spools in the filament dryer, but it was split into 2 sections, so you could control each section independently and just heat up 2 spools at a time if you want to save some energy. What was also different about this Space Pi X4 was it was able to heat up to 100 degrees Celsius as opposed to the 60 or 70 degrees Celsius on the smaller models. So one booth that surprised me this year was the FlashForge booth. I haven't seen or heard too much of this company previously, but I was quite impressed with what they had at their booth. They had the one 3D printer that probably caught my eye the most at this event, and it was called the AD5X printer. So this is just releasing now. It was a Core XY printer with blazing fast speed, and it was pretty simple looking printer with an open frame, but they did do some very clever design aspects. So on this printer, they implemented a really clever, simple way to do multicolor printing. On the side of the printer, you could put up to 4 different spools with 4 different colors, and then for their own material changing system, they had 4 pieces of PTFE tubing that went all the way to the printer head. So then when you're switching colors, you don't have to retract the filament all the way back to the spool location. You just pull it out a little bit in the printer head. And honestly, this made the design a lot cheaper and more simple. And because of this, they're actually able to change filament and print faster than the Bambu Labs AMS system. I think the waste material is probably similar, but you're spending a lot less time retracting the filament all the way throughout the printer system. Again, this printer was blazing fast. They said up to 500 millimeters a second. It had Wi-Fi connectivity, all the good stuff that I would look for in a future printer. So I'm really thinking about getting this one as one of my next printers. So for this one, the price point was a little higher, but it's still consumer level, starting at $399 in the US market. And I think they said in March they're going to start shipping and delivering those units to the US market. Also at FlashForge, I found out that they made their own 3D printing filaments. They had a nice big array of different colors, and a couple that really caught my eye were the Nebula Blue and the Sparkle Purple. I think I'll try out a couple spools of those in the near future as well. In terms of different 3D printing filaments at the show, they had a lot of soft 3D printing materials. Some of them I haven't heard of before. Of course, we all know about TPU as a soft material, but they also had TPS, TPV, TPEE, and more materials. At some of the booths, they had these nice little cubes that had a different type of material or infill density in each section of the cube, so you could squeeze that and find the different hardnesses of the different materials used there. Honestly, there's a lot of variables to choose from between materials, the infill density that you're using, the infill density pattern. There's a lot of different variables you could use to get different results in terms of your softness and flexibility of your print. Also, speaking of 3D printing filaments, there was a 40-foot long, full-on mass production extrusion filament machine. This thing was massive, and it was running and spitting out real material live at the show. This company was called Friend Machinery. They said they made the machines to make the filament for Esun, Bambu Labs, Polymaker, Sunloom, all the big guys. So I was able to talk with their sales guy there, and I got a few interesting stats from them. These machines cost around 26,000 US dollars, including the shipping fee, and they can extrude 35 to 40 kilograms of material per hour. It was hard to actually see how fast that filament was coming out of the machine, so I tried to take a slow motion video of the filament, but it was still just moving so fast. At the show, it was extruding about 46 meters per minute, but they said they could go up to 120 meters per minute. So at the show, they were changing out a new 1 kilogram spool of filament every 8 minutes, but at full speed, they said they'd be changing that out every 3 minutes. That's a lot of filament. They also mentioned it takes some time to set up and get these machines going, so once you get it going, you don't stop. They run this thing 24 hours a day, and they just keep pumping out spools and spools of filament. Mass production. So one of the next companies I saw was Esun, and big shout out to Esun. They were giving out free small packs of filament, so I got 5 different packs of filament that I'm going to try out later on some future prints. So one interesting thing I saw at Esun, I hadn't seen this before, they had this UV color changing material. So once you print this material out of your printer, it's white, but you can take a UV light and run it over the print, and it will actually change the color after it's been printed out. This is a pretty cool concept, and I hadn't seen that before now. All right, so some of the trends I saw at TCT Asia. Shoes, shoes, shoes. There were shoes everywhere. There were some booths there that you would go up and you'd actually get your feet scanned, and they would print out soles for your shoes on site right there. There were some shoes that were composite. They had a 3D printed base of the shoe or sole, and then they had a leather top side of the shoe that looked really nice and stylish. There's also some shoes with really creative looking designs that could have never been manufactured using traditional methods. A lot of people were really studying and working on really intricate lattices that gave the shoe a very comfortable cushion on the bottom. And there's a lot of thought and research going into how to make those shoes more comfortable. Here's a video of me trying on a 3D printed shoe there. It was really comfortable, by far exceeded my expectations. And I was asking the salesperson there, like, how long do these shoes last? And they said at least 2 years. They're lasting longer than 2 years from the feedback that they're getting, which I was surprised by that as well. I did see some of the DLP machines there that were making the shoes, and they're really high quality. Because of this technology, you couldn't even see the layer lines. So I stopped at several different booths and asked about the pricing of these shoes, and they all seem to be in the $90 to $150 range, which is honestly not bad from what I was expecting for 3D printed shoes. I think if this cost keeps coming down and the creativity and the comfort level keeps going up, this could be a really, really big trend in the future. So one of the booths I stopped at there had a king-size 3D printed bed. It looked like a purple mattress, but it was actually a 3D printed bed. Someone at the booth said that they heard this cost around $10,000, but they weren't really sure. So after I saw the 3D printed bed, I just happened to be walking by a booth with a giant 3D printer that had just finished printing out a full-size 3D printed chair. So the people at the booth were really friendly. They invited me in to come down and sit in the chair. I didn't get any video of it, but I did sit in it, and it was cool as a first experience. My first time to sit in a 3D printed chair. So I saw a few companies there with very tiny 3D printers, with something like an 80mm by 80mm bed. But honestly, it didn't seem to be that popular of a trend. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I saw many, many companies and booths there with very large scale 3D printers. A lot of these 3D printers were in the range of 1 meter by 1 meter, 3 feet by 3 feet. And there's even a company there that specializes in helping you to build your own custom large format printers. So you can work with this company, you'll tell them what size you want, and they'll help you order all the materials, ship all the things to you, and help you give you instructions how to assemble and set it up. So there was a lot of booths there, what I would call enabling technology companies. So they weren't making 3D printers per se, but they were small booths off to the side that were making all the parts that go into 3D printers. So there was these smaller booths all over the place that were making just specific parts such as linear encoders, linear rails, belts, servo motors, bearings, power supplies, just about every part of a 3D printer that you can think of. There was a company there that focused on just that part. I did talk to a vendor there that specialized in making heated beds. They said they supplied Creality and some other companies. So one thing that was interesting, I asked the boss of that company if they made any heated beds for 3D printers that were split into separate heating zones. That way, if you're only printing on one zone, you just heat that zone and you can save a lot of electricity. And they said, yeah, very easy. You just add a few more wires and you have to split the zones. They said they provided that already for a couple different 3D printer companies. So it's cool to hear that people are actually taking this concept and making it into reality. So my previous video idea on split zone heated beds was not so crazy after all. So now let's get on to metal 3D printing. Nearly half of the entire show area was probably focused on metal or metallics 3D printing, which is cool and all, it's just not quite my cup of tea because it's not really a consumer level technology. But here's a few highlights that I saw. So there's lots of companies advertising making crowns for the dental industry. These are 3D scanned and 3D printed to give a highly customized solution. And as far as I know, 3D printing is the primary way to make crowns today. So this is a mature market here. So there's lots of companies showing 3D printed turbine housings or rocket engine housings for rocket companies. The other area of focus I saw is the automotive industry. They have a lot higher budgets for 3D printed parts, and they've got higher needs to actually have real metal parts in the prototyping process. So the major technology I saw for the metal 3D printing was SLS, selective laser sintering. So basically the parts would be made in a powder. So basically the parts would be made in a bed of very fine powder, which was the raw material, and there'd be a laser that shoots down and fuses or melts that metal together to make the part that you want. And then once it had finished on that layer, a brush would come over and brush over a new layer of this fine powder material, and then the process would start over again. And then it would repeat this layer by layer by layer until the part was completed. Then you could reach into this bed of this fine powder and pull out your completed part. So some of the operations in the metal 3D printing area were just massive. There was machines for 3D printing that were larger than entire rooms. Some of them were even 2 stories high. You had to climb up a ladder to get to the top of the machine to fix or work on things. Those machines were just massive. Another interesting technology I saw in the metal printing area was basically a printer that looked like it laid down thick welding beads just to create the rough shape of the part. So then after the rough shape of the part was formed, they would use CNC machining to process critical surfaces that would be needed for later assembly. So one booth there had an entire car chassis made out of this welding style 3D printed that was completely fitted with wheels, tires, electric motor, batteries, and a full rolling chassis of a car frame. Completely 3D printed, and then it had areas that were CNC machine finished as well. So that sums up my one day at TCT Asia 2025. I was super busy the entire day. There was so much to see. I could have easily spent 2 or 3 days there. So I hope you guys got a lot of value out of this video. Leave a comment down below. What was your favorite topic, technology, or trend that I talked about in this video? Maybe I could take a deeper dive into one of those areas in a future video. So if you've made it through the whole video, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to me. Make sure to like and subscribe down below, and I'll be bringing you lots of great new 3D printing news in the future. Until then, I'll see you next time.